Hello and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Today we are going to talk about climate change. We have a couple of guests in the studio here today to talk to you about it and to talk with us about it. First, Mayor John Mitchell is with us. Thank you, boss, for coming in.
Thanks for having me, Jim, as always.
And Mark Searles, who is the Chief Meteorologist at WJAR, Channel 10 in Providence. A lot of people obviously know who you are from watching you in the city here.
Appreciate that.
Thanks,
Thank you so
thanks
much
for coming on. I asked Mark to come on. I've known Mark for a long time, and he's been talking about climate change since I've known you, 20 plus years. So this is not a new subject, and obviously the mayor has been dealing with this issue since he was first elected into office. So there's two dynamics coming at it here, both of you from different sides, but I think it's good because they come together. So I appreciate you both coming in and taking the time. I guess the first thing, Mark, is the basic question, and I think a lot of people still don't know. What is climate change?
Right. So, I mean, to understand that, you got to start with what the word climate is and the relationship between weather and climate. And as a meteorologist, I deal with weather, which is the here and now, right? This is today's weather. It's sunny, it's hot, it's cold, it's happening today. Climate is the weather conditions that you expect at a certain spot at a specific time of year, right? So our winter climate in southern New England, it's cold, it's snowy. Our summer climate, hot, occasionally dry. Spring, wet and cool. We get that, right? So climate change refers to the changing of those long-term patterns. Our summers becoming hotter, more humid. We're definitely noticing that. That's the change in our summer pattern. Much higher humidity in these last several decades. Our falls are becoming warmer. Winter's starting later. A transition of the seasons, times like that. That's what climate change is. Doesn't necessarily have any correlation with what's causing the climate change, that is specific related to the changing of our weather patterns and our climate. And it's undeniable that it's happening.
Yeah, especially, I mean, you look at, I was just reading in the paper the other day that, I mean, we've had now 2 heat waves of 6 days or longer in the same summer, which hasn't happened in years.
Right, and no, and we can certainly see it happening around us, right? I mean, the mayor and I were talking about this. We were all talking about this just before we came on. Those of us that have lived here our whole lives, we're all southern New England natives. We know that things are different now than when we were kids. We definitely know that our winters are not as cold. Our summers are way more humid. I mean, it's almost impossible. You feel for people that don't have the benefit of air conditioning on these 6-day, multi-day heat waves. That you're living on the second, third floor. The apartments and the homes have no opportunity to cool off at night because the ocean is absorbing so much heat, and that gets released as moisture and humidity. So because of our proximity to the ocean, we are feeling the effects of this climate change on a much greater scale than other parts of the country and other parts of the world are. But we're certainly seeing it and feeling it right here in southern New England.
Mayor, you've been talking about this since you were first elected. And, I think some people might say, well, why does the city care? Why does the chief executive of the city care about this? And it's not just the city. I mean, people in Rochester, a town of 3,000, should be caring too. But so why should government care?
Yeah, there are lots of reasons for it, and in particular, why should New Bedford care is sort of a multifaceted answer. I do believe, just for starters, that I've been convinced by the evidence that not only is the planet's climate changing rapidly, but that it is primarily caused by human activity, right? And that debate is becoming less of a debate now, and what's becoming even less of a debate, that the horse is sort of out of the barn. Like, we could change everything today, but we would still experience increased temperatures for the next few decades, and all that implies in terms of weather disruptions and other things. So I feel strongly that New Bedford has a moral obligation to play its part in hitting the brakes, right? And so that's why we've worked very hard to be leaders in renewable energy and energy conservation, just as a matter of basic public policy. But we also know, because the horse is out of the barn, we've got to change, right? And we've got to change rapidly, because here in New Bedford, we stare climate change right in the face, right? So we have the largest levee on the East Coast for a reason. We are vulnerable to massive storm surges that this city has experienced over the decades, most recently with Hurricane Bob, but there's been some, near misses even in recent years. And so that is there because it was determined, some 50 years ago that we were prone, but now with rising sea levels, even more so. But it's more fundamental than that, right? This summer we've seen extreme heat, extreme dryness, to the point that we're concerned about the drinking water supply as we speak. We are concerned about the heat island effects of folks who live in tenement neighborhoods and other neighborhoods, and what that means, especially for people with asthma or other respiratory illnesses. And we're also concerned about things like the fishing industry, right, which is our bread and butter here. There's a reason why there isn't a lobster fishery, hardly a lobster fishery anymore in southern New England. It's because those lobsters with their little legs have migrated northward because the water's way too warm for them here. More ominously, there's the scallop industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry and is almost single-handedly accounted for the fact that New Bedford is the leading commercial fishing port in America. That industry is vulnerable to ocean acidification. As carbon dioxide is absorbed in the ocean, carbonic acid is generated. It tends to lower the pH of the ocean. And with that lowering of the pH, it becomes hard for shellfish like scallops to form their calcium-based shells, right? They can't reproduce, in other words. And so if they're not reproducing, fishermen aren't catching them, they're not landing them. That means the fewer boats are going to go out. That means that ultimately it could have very devastating effects on the entirety of the port of New Bedford. So, that's not an overnight thing, but we've seen other fisheries around the United States affected by ocean acidification. It would be a huge deal here. So, we look at all these things, and the list goes on, and we say, we have to do things about it. We have to take measures now and not wait 10 years, not kick the can down the road. And that's what we've been doing over the last several years.
Mark, you've talked about this, and I know you've talked with officials in town and stuff like that over the years and stuff like that. Do you find that communities are looking at this issue? And I guess to both of you too, do you find, you're the chairman of energy for the U.S. Conference of Mayors, an ideal chairmanship actually with this issue. So when you're talking to other people, how is it being received, I guess?
More so now than it was in previous years and decades. And I think the mayor, one of the couple things I love about the NB Resilient program that the mayor and the city of New Bedford have implemented are the words adaptation, mitigation, and you also just use the word extreme. And that's when Jim and I started talking about this 20 years ago. What we felt was going to be the manifestation of climate change would be a pattern of extremes, but nobody really quite knew what that meant. What is a pattern of extremes, right? Climate change doesn't necessarily mean it's just getting warmer and it's getting warmer out of control. There's also going to be patterns of extreme cold snaps on certain parts of the planet, extreme wet periods, and extreme dry periods. So what is normal to us, or what we felt was normal in our childhood and over the past 50, 60 years now, it's like a chaos theory. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And that's what we're witnessing right now. And it's undeniable that it's happening with the extreme drought out in the west, the dry period that we have gone through here this summer in the Northeast.
We're like 1.5 feet below where we're supposed
in
to
some
be
areas,
water-wise.
Certainly, in some areas we are. So that is it, and we have to adapt to that because, like the mayor said, the horse is out of the barn. We saw back in the 80s with the hole in the ozone layer. Once we identified what the problem was with those CFCs and the propellants, the aerosol propellants, those were cut back. We were able to mitigate that, and the ozone layer healed itself over time. Not to say that we can completely reverse the effects of climate change and warming on the planetary scale, but if we utilize the technology that's available to us, and I really believe it starts at the local level. Leaders like Mayor Mitchell, large cities, large towns have to lead the way, because I think individually we feel as though, what can we do as a person? I can't afford an electric car. Families can't afford to pay for an electric car.
Right.
I can't afford to put a solar panels on my roof. It has to start on the broader scale, and the leaders have to help us, guide us into that direction. So it has to. This is exactly what needs to be happening. It has to start on this level, and then we can sort of fall in line with it, because the pollution situation on city buses, mass transit. And
just cars.
People have to work. If you can't afford the $65,000 Tesla, who can?
Right.
So you're going to get a clunker, and if you can find one to buy today, right?
Yeah.
So that's the reality. Is we have to work. People just can't all of a sudden say, well, I care about the planet, but I have to feed my family too, right? So there has to be a balance here. We really have to have this conversation more, and I think that steps like this are important, and that's that's what I hope to accomplish with this conversation.
Yeah, Mark brings up a great point. So sometimes some asked, as you were getting at too, and your question, like, you're a city, right? So cities don't have direct authority over emission standards. They can't regulate utilities, and we don't have the power to enter into international treaties that might affect those things in other countries, right? So what does the city have to do with any of this, right? So, we do have certain authorities about zoning and how densely people live. We do have control over transit authorities, the development of electric vehicle infrastructure, and those are all things that we can put into place. But what's more fundamental, it seems to me, is our ability to lead, to set an example. Somebody has to be out there saying, you know what, we've got to change, and this is what we're willing to do. What about all of you? And so that's what we've tried to do as a city. The good news is that, despite the retrenchment at the federal level a few years ago with the Paris Accords and with the de-emphasizing of climate mitigation generally, America's mayors stepped forward, right? So it wasn't just me, of course, but it was mayors across the country who, agreed to pursue the goals in the Paris Accord, who agreed to set certain carbon neutrality deadlines, who agreed, to convert their vehicles to EVs, their buildings to more energy efficient technology, and so forth. And so, we're seeing at the national level through the U.S. Conference of Mayors a real tidal swing among cities in that general direction. Cities can't do it alone, of course, but if we're setting the tone here, I'm optimistic that in the long run others will follow.
Do you find that the biggest challenge that you both face from your standpoints is convincing people that it exists, or money, or I don't know. I mean, what are the biggest things that it's time? Because you had said that you don't see the changes right off the bat as you were talking about the fishing industry. So it's people are reluctant to, I don't say believe, but we don't really see it.
Yeah, I would say, and we're talking off air about this, right? So I think the debate around whether the climate change is real, whether it's caused by mankind, has sort of faded to the background. There's still some folks out there who are, the so-called, climate change deniers. I think that's becoming a smaller and smaller segment. Polls tend to show among the American electorate, among the American population. What's missing now is a political consensus around urgent action. Like, you ask a lot of people, they'll say, it's been warm and, we're seeing this crazy weather out there, and there is something to this climate change thing. But, that doesn't necessarily translate into, urging their elected officials to take steps to do something about it, right? I think it's growing toward a consensus. It's not there yet. And the question is, will it grow to a consensus in time for us to avoid the worst of the worst effects of climate change? And so, we've seen some progress at both the federal and the state level here, not in every state and certainly not in every country, in terms of changes in policy that will lead, I think, to stave off some of the worst effects. But there's a long way to go, as we know, and we know that some of the damage is going to happen even if everything stopped today. All of the stuff that we want to stop today. There's the climate change is in motion as it is.
And I agree. And what I would say is that I think that really the messaging is key, and that's why I say it starts with elected officials. It starts with trusted elected officials. People, just in my opinion, being in the media, we have a trust issue recently, and it's been brought on because of previous administrations and things have been said about the media, on the national level is what I'm referring to. But if you're seen as an official who's not pushing an agenda, is doing it because let's be honest, what affects people the most? We care about our loved ones' safety and health first and foremost, and we care about our wallets. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, this is not a political issue. Nobody likes to throw money away. Right. And nobody wants to see their loved ones or their personal safety threatened. And that's what climate change does. Let's be honest. It threatens your safety, your loved one's safety, and it's costing you money. Like the mayor just said, it's when fishing industries are being changed or completely eradicated, that affects the economy. When your electric bill is doubling, I'm scared to see what's going to happen, because our natural gas powers the vast majority of our electrical grid right now. and natural gas prices are almost doubling coming this fall,
Right.
it's going to cost you money. So we have to convert our grid. The main thing that this country has to do is convert and become responsible. We have the technology. We've got the greatest country on this planet with the natural resources between hydro, solar, wind, to convert our grid over. And that's this climate bill that was just passed. It's so confounding trying to go through these things, and it's frustrating. But they did pass a climate bill recently that I think is taking the right steps.
And people have said it's a step
transition.
in the right direction.
It is. Now, the electric vehicle thing, I think, is, you can argue that it's probably not going to have any impact on us because there's a thing about the batteries. They have to be produced in North America, and we don't have the technology there yet. Right? But they can produce an electric car in Europe for $30,000. Why can't we do that here in the United States? Yeah. That has got to happen so we can make it affordable for people and convert our grid over. Make it so that I can put solar panels, or you can put solar panels on your house or your apartment, and you can power yourself. And you can, those are steps that can happen because, let's be honest, in our lifetime, the population of this planet is at an unsustainable growth rate, right? This November, like 8 billion people is going to be the population of this planet. In 1998, that's 2 billion more than what we had in 1998. Yeah. So we're growing about 1 billion every decade. We can't sustain that.
Right. You had said, and the mayor talked about it, but I want people to understand too, it's not just the United States. The weather across the world is changing.
It's a global
and I don't think people grasp that either. I mean, the heat in London this past month was unbelievable. Right. Record highs.
Right. Well, so the ocean, it all goes back to the ocean. Over 70% of this planet is covered with ocean water. And like the mayor said, it's not an immediate effect, right? We talk about the scallop industry. But the ocean, the top 2 meters of the ocean absorb as much heat as the entire atmosphere. And water takes longer to heat up and longer to cool down than air. Air is almost immediate. Mm-hmm. But the ocean retains its heat, and it retains carbon dioxide. So as the Earth warms and the climate's changing to a warmer climate, the oceans are warming, and they're retaining that warmth. And it's a global circulation. So what happens? That the eddies around the Earth, it circulates up to the poles and south and north, melts the glaciers. We add more water. So warm water expands. Now you add more natural fresh water into it. That's rising. At the same time, this is another crazy concept that we can even get into, but we're still feeling the effects of our last glacial period, like 20,000 years ago. The glacier, where we're sitting today, was covered in glaciers. It's still melting, subterranean. So in some sections of the East Coast, the ground level is still sinking. So you're battling a sinking ground level and rising ocean waters at the same time. It's a big, big problem up and down the East Coast. You talk about flood insurance. You talk about places that never thought they even had to think about flood insurance. Right. Yeah, I live 2 miles inland. Groundwater, big issue. You'll see it in Florida. You'll see it over the next several decades. We're just now starting to really see the manifestation of what we started thinking could possibly happen decades ago. It's happening in front of our eyes.
Well, the thing I read an article too this past week that back in 1972, President Nixon at the time got a memo that talked about climate change and that things, and it just amazed me that, I mean, like I said, I've known you for 20 plus years and you were talking about, but back in 1972, the government thought that this was going to be an issue down the road. Yeah, and there are, scientists were talking about the greenhouse gas effect back in the 50s, at least, if not before, and so it has been for mankind, akin to Aesop's fable of the fish and the frog in boiling water, right? Mm-hmm. It's nothing to get alarmed about, but the things are getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and then the point of no return comes upon you before you know it, and that's that we don't want to be in that. We have the tools to understand where things are going bad, right? We have the knowledge to foresee disaster coming, and I don't use that term lightly, but you can't continue to deny the need to act, not just to act, but to act with some level of urgency. I think, and I'll just add one other point, and that is, about the role that we in New Bedford play, right? So I think one of the things that's holding back the political consensus around urgent action is that we live in suffice it to say, a very politically divided country. Sure. And so the folks that are urging immediate action or more dramatic action tend to be, written off as, elitists and places like
Boston and the Bay Area out in San Francisco,
they're out of touch,
New York,
right?
they're out of touch. And in some ways, it's understandable that some folks in Middle America and the rest of America can see that as being, way too anxious, way too alarmist. But we in New Bedford don't fall into those categories, right? So we are, we are in our own metro area. We're not part of like any of those places, right? And like we see it very clearly here, as I was explaining before. And so, what I try to do at the local levels to say to folks that, look, let's get real. Here's the evidence, and the evidence is that we've got to take steps. We've got the resources to take those steps. Let's do it now. Let's not be a place where 10 years from now or 20 years from now or beyond, our children or grandchildren are going to say, hey, you know what, you blew it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. You're both dads. I'm a dad. Our kids are younger, and I mean, you just put it right simplistic. I mean, are we going to blow it for our kids and our grandkids?
Right. I mean,
that's hard to say we're not going to do anything.
Right. Yeah. I look. It's we can talk about the moral obligation to future generations. I tend to see it that way, but it's like especially if you have young kids, you want them to grow up, and make it personal. Think about if you want your kid to not have to move out of the city they're in, or at least the neighborhood they're in, because of the threat of storm surge or the threat of heat island, or if you want them to make sure that they're financially secure, they're not paying out of pocket things that are costing more because of climate change. Right. We need to do something. It's not to say we can totally shape the future exactly. Nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but we know that if we take certain steps, that the chances of bad outcomes will fall. And frankly, I think we all agree that we owe it to our kids to do that.
100% agree, but it's going to be so challenging, honestly. As a mayor, a senator, whatever, there are so many issues that folks face on a day-to-day basis. That how am I going to feed? How am I, food scarcity, my water quality, all these in many cities in America. How am I going to get to work? How am I going to get a job? The last thing people are thinking about is probably climate change. But when you really make it known to them that a lot of these issues that you're facing are tied in either directly or indirectly to the changing climate. And I would think that maybe one of your greatest challenges is convincing people of that, making them aware that this is really something that they should be concerned about, but also how can they attack that without it attacking their wallets and helping them, and that's just going to be so frustrating sometimes.
Right. So a lot of the arguments we've made in support of the measures we've taken in energy conservation and the expansion of renewables here, including offshore wind, is that there are other benefits besides de-risking climate change, right? And that includes, the prospect of jobs associated with those industries, the prospect of lower taxes, right? I mean, we converted all the city's streetlights, some 10,000 of them, to LED, and we retrofitted dozens of city buildings with energy efficient technology. We've done a number of other things over the years to lower the city's energy expenses, right? And that directly translates to lower taxes, all else being equal, right? So, there are good things that can come from taking appropriate measures now. In the long run, what I would argue to folks is, if we do the right thing, it's actually going to save us money.
Right. We got a couple minutes left, but I want to ask each of you, because you deal with your colleagues on a national level as well. So when you're talking to meteorologists and when you're talking to mayors in the central part of the U.S. or the plains or what have you, are they with you from what you're talking about on the East Coast? I mean, are they talking about climate change the same way you are, but in obviously different situations because the weather is different or the climate's different?
Well, sure. I mean, my colleagues out in the Midwest and even the desert Southwest, they have a multi-year drought happening, and the wildfires, they're not going away. Right. So absolutely, that is their primary focus, right? More frequent droughts, more frequent wildfires. Here on the East Coast, my colleagues, we're mostly concerned about that warming ocean basin.
Right.
I mean, I'm an East Coast guy from Seekonk, Massachusetts. I've lived here my whole life. Like, we know what's happening here along the East Coast, what's happening with our ocean.
So, and I'll ask you the same thing with the mayors. But so what you're so it's the same message, but with different characteristics when you're looking at that.
Right, because we're not having a widespread wildfire issue here, right in the Northeast. Our concern is the frequency and the strength of hurricanes and tropical storms. We've dodged a bullet. I remember Bob. I remember Gloria in '86. Bob in '91 was devastating here to southeastern Massachusetts.
Well, we dodged Sandy.
We dodged Sandy. Sandy was terrifying. From that was probably the most terrifying moment in my 30-year meteorological career. The prospects of Sandy possibly hitting westerly Rhode Island and placing the vast majority of Rhode Island and Buzzards Bay, southeastern Mass, on the eastern side of a major hurricane, like 1938, like 1954. Yeah. We've had them in our history. Yeah. It is a matter of time. Henri this past summer, we dodged that bullet. We got lucky. Yeah. It was still had some major impacts, but it's a matter of time, and that is really going to be an eye opener for a generation that's never experienced it, or people that have moved here that have never experienced it. You're driving down here to your studios, driving down Cove Ave, like you said, going past the large seawall, the mitigation, the hurricane barrier. I mean, that Providence, the city of Providence, has the same thing. Like there are major cities that haven't felt the impact of a major hurricane in decades, and we hope the infrastructure will hold up. We hope the hurricane barriers and the walls will hold up. We don't know.
You don't know. I mean, we are very appreciative that we have that wall there, right?
Well, it's amazing the amount of vessels that come in during those storms.
Well, it is, and that levee the hurricane barrier was built in the '60s at to the tune of $18 million, right? To build that today would be north of $1 billion, but cities, including New York, including Boston, and others, have come here to figure out, well, how can we get one of those, right? Because they see the issue, and but we also don't treat it as the French did in World War II as the Maginot Line, right? Like the wall's there and we're good, right? Because we know that there are vulnerabilities and we don't know how big the storms are going to get. I mean, as far as talking to other mayors around the country goes, I mean, if you talk to, Mayor Turner in Houston, he'll tell you about the 50 inches of rain that Hurricane Harvey dumped on his city, which, as if you've ever been to Houston, it's a whole lot of concrete and cement. There's no place for that water to seep into the ground. If you talk to Frank County and Des Moines, Iowa, he'll tell you about the floods and the levees being overwhelmed. If you talk to Mayor Cantrell in New Orleans, she'll tell you about how levees break and how their wastewater system backs up because of all the the lack of disconnectedness in the storm systems and the wastewater systems, but also the fact that there's just a whole lot of water there, and the list goes on. I could give.
So it's the same with Mark in that it's. I mean, you've got your colleagues across the country who are dealing with the issue and who are talking like you about it, but with just different characteristics. So I mean, it's sort of a good thing that there's, I don't want to say consensus, but there are people out there that are similar to you with similar responsibilities for both of you that are preaching the same thing, even though the characteristics are a bit different. And that's what helps convince people that action has to be taken.
I would say that's a great word. I would say responsibility. And I think that's sort of where I've gotten in my career. And I feel, and it's not hokey to say this, and I feel it's genuine from the mayor as well. I feel responsibility. The limited voice that I have to get this out to Southern New England, I have a responsibility to have this conversation. I think it's very important. And I feel as though the mayor feels that same way. It's our responsibility to talk about, to bring these issues out, but to not just have it stop there at talk. Like, I want to do as much as I possibly can. That's why this is important, and I'm really thankful to have this opportunity with both of you guys. And I would like to further that. I would love to kind of see what's the next step, right? We have to get more elected officials on board with this. We have to really make it apparent to people that this is a problem that they really need to be concerned about. This is not just a buzz term, right? It's affecting our lives. It's affecting our wallets, and there are opportunities for us to address this now, and move forward with it. And boy, I really, really hope that's going to be the case.
That's a good way to wrap this up. I want to thank both of you for coming in. It was a good discussion, and hopefully we can have more of it down the road. I know, like Mark said, we'd like to do some more. But I appreciate you coming in right now and just getting the ball rolling.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I thank my guests for coming in, and thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.